Hello, Barry.
Hello.
So I'm trying to figure out why my video camera is not working. I'm trying to figure that out here.
So you bring up the video settings.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the video settings. There's something going on here. Usually I have to unplug and replug when this happens.
Yeah, usually that's right. You unplug the USB cable, plug it back in. That usually fixes it.
Yeah. So now I got to go through my rat's nest of Okay, it looks like that did it. Okay, I'm visible to myself now. Let's see if others can see me.
Not yet. There
Okay.
you go. Now we see you.
Yeah, typically it's a unplug, replug, the standard tech support solution.
Right.
Do a cold restart.
Yeah. Turn off the universe and restart it.
It's been done many times. That's my understanding now.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Along with parallel universes with reverse time flow.
Yeah.
What a great rush of neutrinos.
What, trillions of them pass through your body every day, every minute or something?
Yeah. Imperceptibly.
Yeah.
But we know they're there. Okay.
Yeah, I forget the exact ratio, but every once in a while, one of them will leave a trail in a detector.
A big underwater tank?
Yeah, I think that's what it is, a huge underwater tank.
Yeah. Okay, let me find my notes. Let's see if I can find my notes. Do you have notes, Barry?
Not from this session, I don't think.
Okay, here we go. Collaborology study group. There's Josh. Okay, where are my notes? Well, since I'm relatively uninformed on the topic, I was waiting to see if anybody had some systemic views on the way the midterms have played out, since I'm not up on it.
Well, I think the main thing is that the Democrats did retain control of the Senate.
Now, is that conclusive? And what really happened there? And even though the MAGAs seem to have increased their numbers in the House, why are we talking about a red wave fizzling out? That's what I don't understand.
Oh, because normally, statistically, in a midterm election, the incumbent loses a huge number of seats. And this year, they lost maybe a dozen in the House and none in the Senate. So the huge red wave that was anticipated in this midterm simply didn't materialize.
Yeah, but the Dems still lost seats. So this seems like spin.
Yeah, but usually they lose something like 40 seats. And I think I don't know how many they lost, 6 or something.
Still, doesn't that mean that the Republicans now have majority in the House?
I don't think that's resolved yet. I think there's still a dozen races that haven't been called or decided. So it's close. I think they're estimating that the Republicans will end up with majority in the House, but it's not a done deal yet.
Yeah, see, it just all sounds like spin to me. I mean,
well, yes, a lot of projections are spin. You're sort of hoping against hope and predicting against predictions.
Yeah. So if Congress is still divided
Yeah.
and nothing can happen because, now we got deadlock still, we still got complete deadlock. How is this progress? I don't see how this is progress.
It's not progress because the whole governmental structure is obsolescent, anachronistic, arcane, and dysfunctional. It has been since it was invented.
Let's welcome Josh and Kayla, who have now joined us. Kayla, I thought you weren't going to be here today.
That was Saturday. Today's Sunday, right?
Yes.
It's
Okay,
Sunday.
that was Saturday.
Holy
I'm
smokes.
sorry.
It is Sunday.
Yes, because yesterday
You
you were
screwed up,
outside. Yesterday you were with the Ducks.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Oh, by the way, right now, I'm actually on my Starlink connection, which got permanently mounted on my roof yesterday. So how's the video? How's the audio coming across?
It's beautiful. But we have to wait to see if there's any glitches when the satellites move past. So you have to wait until there's a switch to the next satellite.
Barry, I think I misspoke yesterday. I was under misconceptions regarding the actual orbital elevation. I think it's actually more like 500 kilometers. I thought it was more like 100 miles, but it's actually more like 300 and something miles. But
yeah, that makes sense because you don't want it that close to the top of the atmosphere.
yeah. And my understanding is they picked it because they wanted to keep the latency to 22 milliseconds.
Yeah, that still makes sense because 300 miles is still, especially 300 miles over cable is a lot slower than 300 miles, over the air.
Ether.
Yeah, whatever you want to call it. The atmosphere is practically a vacuum for all practical purposes of radio waves.
And while we were waiting for this video on YouTube, I came across a 20+ minute explanation of the technology of the Starlink satellite dish. It is remarkable. It's really fascinating. And so I learned a lot about how it was designed and how some of the design decisions got made and how many layers there are to the actual satellite dish. It's pretty astonishing what they accomplished.
But it's still a relatively narrow cone, not any dynamic tracking, correct?
Yeah, obviously, beamform and directed, and with I think some were like 1,280 little micro antennas in the actual satellite device dish itself.
That means they could do steering if they wanted to, but they don't.
They follow the satellite from
a
a stationary physical location. They actually beamform and follow a satellite across the 4 minutes. Across the 4 minutes that it takes for the next satellite to come by. So it's not instantaneous. It's actually a fairly long 4-minute duration.
Okay. So it is a phased array beam. What do you call it? Directional? What's the nomenclature for that?
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. It's very remarkable.
Yeah. That's what I thought it was going to be yesterday when you said, no, it was just a fixed cone. But yeah, so
it is a fixed physical location. The motors do not change with the satellite. It's all done via, phased differences and amplitude modulation. It's really, I learned a heck of a lot.
I'm trying to remember the nomenclature. It's not phased array. It's phased.
It is a phased array.
Is that what they call it? Phased array?
That's right.
Forgotten the nomenclature for this.
Yeah. Well, anyway, Elon's got some pretty good engineers working for him.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah. All right. So I really wanted to understand the midterms because I don't. There's all this crap being spouted by everybody you talk to, and it all seems very biased, and I don't actually understand what's really going on. And why does it take days to count votes? I don't understand. Are they counting like 12 votes per day or something like that? What's going on here?
It's because the states set laws that govern how this counting has to be done. And whenever you set something by law, it's about the least optimal mechanism that you can possibly misconceive.
Okay, so explain to me. I thought Arizona was a red state,
It is.
right?
Yep.
So why are we waiting for votes from Arizona?
Oh, well, I think it comes down to the rules for how and when votes are counted. Because in some states, they can go ahead and pre-count the early mail-ins, early drop boxes. In other states, they don't begin counting until the close of the poll on election day. And some states will wait to count the mail-in last. So depending on the sequence in which the counting is spelled out in the state law, some states are much more efficient than others.
Okay, so one thing I heard was, I forget which state it was, said they can actually count mail-in ballots until Saturday, which was yesterday. So at least one new state should be able to be conclusive as of yesterday, it seems to me.
Why would there be a stopping time for counting? Wouldn't they simply count until they finished all the counts?
Well, I think it's the date by which they stop receiving mail-in ballots. I
Oh,
think
that's yes. If your mail-in is postmarked before the deadline, but received after the election day, they will count it. But if it's received too late, then even with the postmark, it's not counted.
Yeah.
But I think the military one, there's an exception. If you're sending from overseas military base, then I think they're much more liberal about counting late arriving ballots.
So
But I
that was
think-
one question. Anybody else have any insights? Kayla, what's going on with the election down in your area?
I have no idea.
I don't.
I have long since stopped following all this political BS. It's too much.
Yeah.
Politics is so polar opposite of scientific concepts. It's just heartening how.
If it were for the fact that, the entire political process controls all of our tax money, it would be ludicrous, but it does. It controls the money that we have to send in. So we have to care in some way.
They passed a law in my state, Massachusetts, that if the tax revenues exceed some upper bound, they have to refund it. And out of the blue, I got a refund check for a few $100s because they capped out they went over the cap on state income tax revenue.
That's fascinating. Did they do it based on just taking the excess and distributing it, or did they base it on what you contributed?
It's proportional. So they take the total excess and then they apportion it depending on how much you actually paid in taxes. So you get a proportional amount. But I didn't even know they had this law, or if I knew about it, I didn't really register. So now I got to go to the bank and deposit.
Do they do that for corporations also? Is it businesses get a refund?
I suppose so. I don't know why it would make any difference, but I don't actually know for sure. I think if you pay state income tax, then they have to do the refund. It's a new state law. It's fairly recent.
Okay, so that was question number one for me. I didn't understand that. Question number two, again, in an area where I have no expertise. Maybe Josh does in this one. What happened to FSX?
Oh boy.
Tell me what happened there. What really happened?
Well, I only know what the headlines say, which is that they got hacked or something and they went belly up. And it's not just FSX, there's a whole slew of them that are all kind of tied together, that are all it's a falling dominoes thing.
Yeah, so I still don't understand where value comes from for all these quote unquote coins. It seems like it's all speculation and it's all Ponzi scheme. Is there actually real value there?
It's the Dutch tulips. It's true of all money. All money is based on the faith that the money will retain its value.
Unless it was backed by something precious.
Right, like gold or something.
Yes.
And Bitcoin wasn't backed by anything. And it was easily hackable because it was all in software.
Well, not easily hackable, but hackable.
Well, yeah. Well, the thing is that these exchanges could be hacked by the insiders. The insiders could,
Oh,
kind of-
obviously. Yes, obviously.
that's what happened with a lot of these, is that the insiders basically.
See,
mean,
that was why I was fundamentally distrustful of all of these things, right? Turns out, I read a couple of years ago that of all the Bitcoin that exists in the world, still the earliest couple dozen own like 90% of it. That's what I had read. So I don't know if that's true.
And if they ever try to spend it, the value would drop.
Yeah.
I mean, if you flood the market with something that you've been withholding, then the value of it plummets.
Right. So therefore, you get dozens or hundreds or thousands of new coins, and you get these loudmouths like Elon pushing their favorite coin, like Dogecoin or whatever, and they pump it.
Yep.
Anybody can do this.
Pump and dump. Pump and dump. You can do that with stock too. Pump and dump in stocks. These are all considered.
Yeah, but at least stocks are in theory regulated. There's no regulation around these quote unquote electronic coins. Not that I can see.
Well, inadequate. To what extent there is regulation, it's inadequate.
To protect people.
I mean, look, what is it? Zimbabwe
Their own
money?
foolishness.
The Zimbabwe dollar bill is $1 trillion Zimbabwe dollars or something.
Is it a
Yeah,
trillion?
I don't know if did you happen to watch? Well, you probably didn't see it. The Nobel Prizes this year. So the Ig Nobel Prizes, they did it on Zoom this year, and besides getting a kind of a token reward, you also got $1 trillion, but it was a Zimbabwe $1 trillion bill. And a Zimbabwe $1 trillion bill is worth about 50 cents.
Yeah, can I even buy a candy bar with it?
I know, but they, of course, the whole thing's a joke anyway. But so they have the. It's like getting a trophy. A trophy is just just a piece of plastic. So what's the value of a athletic trophy except that it represents the fact that you did excel in that event on that date in that competition? It's just basically evidence. But you can, you can manufacture fake trophies. How would anybody know?
Yeah, I still don't even know how NFTs work. Like if I buy an NFT for a piece of art and that piece of art burns, what's my NFT worth?
I have no idea. It means that it's like I owned a house that burned down. I still own the house that burned down.
I own the certificate that said I did own that house.
Right.
I do own that house in theory. I don't get it.
I think it's all a scam, to tell you the truth.
I don't get it. I need younger people to explain it to me. Kayla, explain it to me. Or Josh, explain it to me.
It's inexplicable.
Yeah.
Inexplicable.
So what else happened this week?
Here's Josh. See if Josh has something to say.
Yeah, Josh, do you know what happened with FSX and why we care?
No, you don't care. It's stupid Bitcoin crap. You don't care about that.
Does
I mean,
anybody
Lehman
care?
Brothers, it's the same thing that happened to Lehman Brothers. What is it, 4 or 5 years ago? It's the same. It's basically the same kind of a deal. The securities collapsed. Systems collapse all the time. I mean, the Roman Empire collapsed. A lot of governments collapse. A whole lot of systems collapse. They do. Civilizations collapse. Species collapse. Populations collapse. All kinds of things collapse. And they do.
Did I hear you say, Sam, you don't understand NFTs?
I don't. I really don't. If I buy an
that's
NFT and
cool.
a piece of art and the art burns up, what's my NFT? Well, what's my NFT worth?
It's digital. What do you mean
Right.
the art burns up?
It refers to some
Here, ready? I'll
association.
break it down really simple. You'll get this in 2 seconds.
Mhm.
Remember in the 90s when they started doing stock like code and stock images, and there were stock image sites you can buy a stock image?
Like I can buy a picture of a forest, or a tree or something.
Yeah, exactly. You don't own the trees. You don't own that picture,
Mhm.
you're just renting it out for the rights to use it. That's what
Okay.
that's basically what an NFT is.
It's like Getty
Right.
Images.
It's a
So
license for something digital that you get to own a piece of it. So whenever it's sold, you can have a contract that says, I get a piece of every time someone buys that or uses that as a license fee.
so how's that enforced? How do I know that's going to happen?
It's not going to be enforced. That's why I mean, that's my
Exactly.
opinion.
So what's
But
it worth?
It's like a copyright.
if you can enforce it, it will be worth something. They have yet to have someone have a lawsuit of how they enforce it. So in the future, how it will be enforced is in video games and licensing fees and the metaverse. If someone wants to use that picture of a skateboard in a metaverse, or the actual functional piece of code that makes a skateboard fly around in a virtual reality game, that code itself, if it's used, they have to do a lawsuit and say, you use that in 17 of your EA Sports games, and I want, according to the contract of the NFT, I get a certain percentage, and that other percentage goes to other people that own a piece of the NFT, the non-fungible token. So I agree with you that it's very difficult to enforce that law moving forward, but there is contracts and there is a legal way of tracking who owns what. Weird, right?
It's like copyrights and patents. I mean, you got to go to court to enforce an infringement on a copyright or a patent. The difference being is that the government recognizes the legitimate, that a copyright or patent is legitimate claim of ownership. Whereas NFTs, I don't know if the government recognizes that as having any legitimacy.
Oh yeah, they do.
They do. Does it fall under copyright law, for example? Do they make it?
Well, it depends what you're NFTing, what you're putting into a non-fungible token.
It's a little bit like intellectual property, I suppose.
That's all it is. It's just.
But you can't copyright an idea. Idea like a mathematical formula. You can't copyright a mathematical concept. You might be able to. I don't even know if you. There's some things which are considered inapplicable to copyright.
Yeah, I want to know, when you're breaking things into so many bits and pieces, it just gets really complicated. So those lawsuits, kind of like this whole lawsuit about the Getty versus Dali, the Getty images, that's going to be a very interesting case if they do go to court and they sue.
The digital archives, the Wayback Machine, and libraries are lending out digital copies of books instead of printed copies of books. And this is all becoming very problematic as to whether a public library can lend out a digital copy of a book.
Because it seems to me the notion of a notary sounds important, right? Because if I declare that I own something and nobody else has any evidence of it, then I'm the only authority for that claim.
Yep.
So why would the government choose to defend my claim if there are no other witnesses?
They don't choose to
Well,
defend
there's
it.
proof
They
of-
give you the right. They give you the legal right to defend it at your own expense. They say if you go to court and say this is infringement, the court will recognize that you have the right, but you have to take the legal action to enforce it.
But then that NFT itself means nothing, right? It's the evidence going into it that means something. I could claim right now I own an island in Bora Bora, right? And I could create an NFT for that.
It's cryptographic and it has actual digital, it's proof of stake, proof that you own it. You have a proof with a hash graph that leads to a contract. And how that all works, I don't know enforceable by law, but I do know enforceable if you want to trade it to another DAO or something like that. So it's really kind of like, I don't know. I've always said, document what you do what you say. So if you're in business and someone says, you never did that, and then you're getting fired for that, if you have a document that shows that with a timestamp that everyone in the company agrees was a software that we all agreed timestamped it correctly and you're not forging it, and you could prove that you actually did what you said you were going to do and they can't fire you for cause. And that's because I got fired for a fake thing I didn't do, where they tried to fire me. They didn't, but that happened to me in one of the tech companies in the 90s. And so I learned that early on, to make sure you have documentation, not just data, but also metadata. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And
Of
I think
course. I
that's what
think
it
that
comes down
that
to.
provenance,
It's metadata law. Yeah.
that evidence trail, the epistemology of a claim, that's all very important. And that's been true ever since we had symbols that represent knowledge. So I'm just trying to figure out how NFTs figure into that, because if I'm acting or thinking in a systems fashion, I'm doing that on Sundays, okay? So I'm thinking about the whole system of NFTs. The NFT itself, the actual act of creating that claim and signing it cryptographically, I get the
And minting
mechanics.
it.
I get the mechanics of it. But the stuff that goes into it, the witness, the actual value of something.
Well, that's up to the person that mints it. If they mint it bad, it's a bad NFT. If they mint it good, it's a good NFT. Like that famous artist that sold it for millions of dollars. If they didn't put that, who bought the piece of art from what was his name? Do you guys remember? I forgot his name.
It's not Banksy, is it?
Not Banksy. It's another name. It's a digital artist that did a piece of art every year, and so he sold. You can mint a collection. You can mint a single piece of art. It's kind of like when you go to an auction house and you buy something. How do you know? You know, you raised your hand, you transferred money from your bank to the auction house, but what if it's not in your possession? You know, it's in a vault somewhere because it's too valuable to put in your house. You need proof of ownership, proof of stake that you own that thing. That's all an NFT is, really, with cryptography built into it. Does that make sense? You can it's just a little it's a bunch of meta numbers that say I own that thing, and here's what I can do with it.
It's like saying that I
How-
own this bank account and I have this amount of money in it. And how does that, how made secure? The bank has to secure the records, and you have to secure your claim to being the owner of that bank account.
So if I take a contract and I do whatever DocuSign does to establish, the proper signage or signing of it, and then that's cryptographically, and time stamped, to a particular event, what's the difference in value between the two? Because that scanned, signed, DocuSigned, encrypted, time-stamped document seems to have all the properties of an NFT. But to me, it actually has more value, because you actually know who signed it, or at least we have now at least a protocol for accepting signatures.
You can
It
show that-
represents,
Yeah, you can show that it can't be forged, or it can't be easily forged. It's like forging a signature on a endorsing a check. I mean, how many people have had a check made out to them and somebody else got the check and endorsed your name on the back of it and deposited it in their account? And these are supposed to be better than forging signatures.
But also you can have many people on the contract, just like if you started a company and you had to do all of that documentation of who is the managers of the company, who has ownership of what stock, different types of stock. It's like a quick little startup a company. That's the more I'm talking to you, the more it makes sense of, I'm arguing the case of you could use NFTs for a lot of things, but the whole system isn't built for them yet. And the way that you connect them to the value through the companies like Ethereum and how you mint the actual NFTs, I never trusted it. That's why I never did it, because I don't want to fight for the ownership.
The gap that I'm trying to understand.
Well, I'm a bad person to explain it because I don't trust it. So I went to OpenSea to mint NFTs and they wanted me to pay money for that. And I said, this is a scam.
Does anybody here own an NFT? Kayla, do you own an NFT? Barry?
No.
Or the correct verbiage is minted. Did you mint an NFT? Because when you mint it, it's ownership. You can have multiple owners. And then you can add who gets what percentage of it if it gets sold to ad infinitum or licensed out. So it's a great idea. It's a great concept. I just going to be very curious to see how it's enforced in the future. In the digital world, it's working for video games and all that sort. There's a real marketplace for it in the video game world, but if you're not in the video game world, which I'm not, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I'm not either. Okay, let me go to my other notes. In the meantime, anybody else want to check in?
I was just going to check in what I was talking to Barry about. We don't have to have this conversation today, but I was just curious, where you'd like to go in terms of inviting people to the conversation. And I was saying Dig VJ moved to another city, so he's his life is kind of flipped upside down a little bit, so he hasn't been able to come to the meetings. But do we want to add more people? You want to keep it small? Like, I'm just trying to see what the intentions are for Kayla,
For this group,
yourself, and
You're
Barry.
talking about this group right here?
Yeah, I'm just saying Glenn popped in 3 weeks ago. Like, should we, in other words, before we were doing things on Facebook, and I think Facebook is dying. I think I've said that for 3 years now, it's going to die. And I think it's kind of on its last death row. So as far as a communication platform, it's not very solid for saying when the meetings are and who's going to be there and the
I
subject
don't even
matters.
say when the meetings are.
No, I know that. That's the conversation I want to have. Should I be blasting that out when they are? Is that
No.
going to annoy you?
In my opinion, I don't care about numbers. I care about the quality of thought and the quality of the interaction. So I'm more interested in people who actually do want to think systemically, think rationally, think model-based, think scientifically, think mathematically, reason well, communicate about that well. And if people actually match that description, then I'm interested in engagement with that people and with those people. And the first few sessions of this laid that out, and I can, point us to that again, but that's my interest. I'm not interested in whether that's 2 people or 2,000 people, not at the moment, okay? And so that's what I'm trying to do in Sundays, which I didn't get on Saturdays or other times, okay? On Saturdays, there's too much other crap that, got filtered into the conversation, and it was not not all rational, not all evidence-based, not all science-based. In fact, some of it was, not even truth-based. So that's why I wanted to do Sundays differently. And I'm trying to be clear about that at every opportunity. So I don't care about announcements personally. I care more about the quality of thought and the quality of the engagement, personally.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, I invited Kayla years ago. I invited Dig VJ. I think they're high quality people. I think I vet people pretty well.
Yeah,
I would
have no
invite
issue.
someone that I thought would not be productive or just bring us down a rabbit hole of arguing about flat Earth or something stupid. But I
I'm
do
always-
miss Colin. I miss Colin coming as quite the character. He's quite rationally based, and he just likes to argue sometimes. But other than that, I like his brain and I like his personality. I like who he is as a human. I don't know. I'm just trying to get I was in a room with a bunch of systems thinkers, and they didn't call themselves system thinkers, but there's 3 of them that I know I've talked to multiple times, and they're system thinkers. And there was about 5 other people in the room, and they were saying, you know what, there's not enough systems thinking, a lot of what we talk about. And I was like, yeah, you guys should come to this meeting, but I didn't tell them where it was exactly. I just told them it exists.
Okay,
So I'm just
that would be
trying to figure out.
fascinating. I actually do really, really hold myself to being open to engagement with anyone. I don't actually disengage unless that person shows me that our means of thinking, our means of understanding truth are so different that we can't proceed. And that's rare. So I'm not into problems with disagreements. I welcome disagreements. That's not the issue. The problem is when you cannot actually continue a conversation with a means of converging on truth or rational thought. That's when I disengage. Now, here's my question to communities of systems thinkers. Very, very often, I hear this and I don't understand. I'm not criticizing, I just don't understand that systems thinkers use the word emergence quite a bit. And what I don't understand yet is the phenomenon of emergence and the characterization of it in a systems thinking way of engagement. I believe I have a hypothesis, but I've never heard that hypothesis in a systems thinking group. So that's what I'm wondering. Does this term emergence have a clear explanation in systems thinking forums? And if so, what is it?
Can I ask a question? Emergence versus what? Meaning versus mathematics? Is there
No,
emergence in mathematics?
No. It's not versus anything. I just don't understand the concept as it's being used. I mean,
I don't understand the context that you're talking about either. I'd like to know what you're talking about, because I know in biology there's emergent. I think there are some emergent properties in mathematics at certain times, but I'm not sure what
why call it emergent though? That's my question. Why call it emergent? What does
as
that word
opposed to
emergent?
what would be the other word to call it?
Derivative. In other words, you can
Derivative.
clearly see where it follows. Like almost all conclusions in mathematics can be derived. Now, here's the thing that cannot be derived in people that talk about emergence. They typically talk about flocking, birds flying around, okay? As an emergent property, like they form, seemingly these thousands or, millions of birds who all of a sudden act in a kind of a coherent way and they fly in a certain way. Now, to me, yes, you can use the word emergent, but you could also look into the dynamics of airflow, of, sonics, of flight, of paths, of pressure, of light, and you could attempt to understand that. And I think it's okay to talk about emergent properties and then
air quality index of 44.
Computer, cancel.
The emergent property of an Alexa.
So we're working on the new version of Alexa, by the way, Sam. That's what's going on.
And there's lots of different devices, like 17 different Echo devices now. So anyway, so what I was thinking was when you first observe a phenomenon, it's okay to say, I don't understand it. It emerged from these properties of the environment. But I think there's a way to understand it if you dig deeper into the environment and the dynamics and the energy flows and everything else, okay? What I don't understand is how you can just stop and say, oh, flocking is an emergent property of flight, and then just stop there. I don't understand that. Why not dig deeper into that and really understand what birds are actually doing, or bats, or whatever they are? Okay, now, I posit completely okay that we may not have the information yet. We may not have conducted the right studies. We may not have the right theories, but at least asking the question is important to me, as opposed to just stopping and saying, okay, that's an emergent property. Let's just accept it like that.
The math of emergent properties is usually pretty arcane, even if you can understand it, which might take a year of study and research. Good luck communicating it to a naive audience. I mean, I'll give you a very simple example. You take two transistors. Now, a transistor all by itself has emergent property. It's a gate. So it can be gated on and off.
So is that an emergent property or an inherent property?
It's emergent property of constructing a device that has has 3 layers.
So isn't that a designed property? You actually engineered it to behave that way, right?
But it's also based on a very obscure, maybe obscure, arcane laws of physics of solid state.
But you understand it well enough to engineer it. That's what I'm saying. So you don't use the word, typically, I don't hear engineers typically use the word emergent when they're talking about transistor gates.
they probably don't use those words because those are such simple systems that only have a very few parts to them, that putting two things together that have a combined behavior is probably too elementary to be called emergent. But the thing is that if you take two transistors and you wire them up in a certain way, you can get a multivibrator, an oscillator. So the design of an oscillator has the emergent property that it oscillates. Well,
But you also design it that way, right? You understand the physics,
Right.
you understand the energy flows, and that's
Right.
why it's a designed phenomenon
Right.
that then therefore I would not necessarily think people would call emergent.
Probably not. I think you tend to use the word emergent where it's sort of accidental, that it comes into being without intention. It's like when you turn on a PA system and you get feedback. It's an emergent property of a public address system when you get a feedback loop that you didn't want. And feedback loops can be very useful if you carefully design them. But look how long it took Harold Black to design the negative feedback amplifier. I mean, I don't know. It's not clear to me whether Harold Black knew exactly what he was doing when he stumbled onto the negative feedback amplifier in the 1920s. But so you can have emergent properties that just are accidental, and you can employ them without understanding them, or you can design them if you understand the underlying physics, the underlying mathematical models. I think you get both. You can observe emergent properties where you don't have the underlying mathematical dynamics. The fact that gravitating bodies can have elliptical orbits or hyperbolic trajectories. I mean, until Newton, nobody even had a concept of how to model that, even though you might be able to observe circular or near circular orbits.
Right. So I fully accept what you say. In fact, that's exactly why I asked the question, is that the use of the word emergent to me is an indicator. It's actually an invitation to asking deeper questions about the dynamics.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm curious whether or not that happens in systems thinking. And I can't say that it doesn't. All I'm saying is I have to study more about it.
Yeah, I think it's a fuzzy boundary between intentional design of a property and emergent property of a design that wasn't intended, just happened to. So you take a piece of glass and you cut it a certain way, it turns into a prism. I'm sure that when they first came up with the prism that made a rainbow, they didn't design that on purpose. They just accidentally cut a piece of glass with an angle, and they got this property that it created a spectrum.
So I would call that a discovery.
Yeah.
Which you could say, hey, that's an emergent property of cutting glass. But then further study can actually educate one or a group about why that happens, about spread spectrum, about wavelength.
So
that's
it's,
cool.
it's fuzzy. I mean, it's fuzzy whether you want to call it a discovery or simply an observation or an intentional design, kind of overlapping. And a lot of engineering is seat of the pants. You just you futz with it until you get the property you want. You don't really know. It's an art as opposed to a science. A lot of it is art. I mean, cutting diamonds to have a nice sparkle, that was an art. I don't know that people who cut diamonds could do the optical, could do the mathematics of the optics. They just figured out how to cut the facets so that they got the brilliance that they wanted. Trial and error.
Trial and error is fine. Trial and error is part of science.
Evolution is trial and error, even where the trial isn't even an intentional trial, it's just an accidental perturbation that generates something that was unanticipated, unforeseen. But once it's observed, you say, oh, well, now can I somehow futz with this thing so that I can, optimize it?
Okay, so I'm going to give you another example. Okay, I use this example sometimes. Let's suppose that we understand chemistry. Okay, and we understand valence, we understand electrons, we understand bonding, we understand molecules, we understand geometries of bonds, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, is that sufficient to understand barbiturates?
I don't know.
Or opioids, right?
So,
There seems to be a lot of insights between understanding atomic dynamics and understanding physiological effects of molecules on the human body.
You
Right?
can understand the concept of a key has to fit a lock. If a key fits a lock, you can rotate it. You can use the metaphor of a key fitting a lock to molecules that can bond because their shape is like a jigsaw puzzle, interlocks. But does that mean that you can design a molecule that has the right shape, to interlock with a complementary molecule? There's
And
one
even
thing
if you
about
could you predict its effects on a human body?
probably
It's
not,
another whole body of knowledge,
probably not.
literally, right? But I think it's valid that people attempt to do so, right? That's a bunch of trial and error. That's a bunch of computational experimentation. That's a bunch of actual physical experimentation. So you could say just knowing the laws of chemistry is not sufficient to know about the effects of barbiturates or opioids or amphetamines or whatever on a human body. But
Probably not. Probably not.
it's okay to keep asking the question, to understand human bodies, to understand the chemistry, understand the interactions, and dig deeper, which is, I think, exactly what we're doing. So even though its effects on the human body could be so quote unquote emergent, we couldn't have predicted it. We didn't know. We didn't design it that way. We can still understand it more deeply. And that's why I don't hear the people saying emergent in that case, even though that that topology of emergence is similar to what I see in other instances when that term is used. Over. Yeah, Josh.
No, what I'm hearing you say, and please tell me if I'm hearing it incorrectly, is there's multidisciplinary understandings of the laws of the universe in different fields of studies, and where they cross over is sometimes confusing to communicate and talk about. And then if someone knows something in one discipline and it's not emergent to them because it was already discovered, but the other person in the other discipline doesn't know about it, so it just seems to have been discovered or emergent, that's where this miscommunication happens. So it's multidisciplinary understanding applied to systems thinking, where it's important to get to who knows what discoveries, so that we're not arguing that they just emerged out of nowhere. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I like the way you characterize that, because that is where my curiosity is. My curiosity is whether that emergence or the use of that word is an invitation to deeper understanding, or whether people say, oh, well, we understand this, and that's emergent, that's magic, which is how I hear the word used a lot. And that's what bothers me,
Well, it's ignorance on one subject, whereas someone else might have the knowledge on that subject. And at least for me, I have knowledge on a lot of different subjects, but it's shallow knowledge. It's not deep knowledge. And that's why I come to these conversations, to try to expand my knowledge and understand, Barry's a plethora of knowledge. He's talking about Blackwell. What was the name that you used? The person that
Harold S.
had
Black,
the feedback.
he invented negative feedback amplifiers, 1920s. Harold S. Black at Bell Labs. And how many people have ever heard of Harold S. Black?
I have never heard. Or
realized that the invention of negative feedback amplifiers was a huge breakthrough. But it gave you stability. You could reproduce. You could have a repeater that reproduces a signal on a telephone line in a stable way.
So
I'll give an example. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Sam.
I was about to change the subject, so follow up on it first.
Oh, I was just going to say, there's a new show on Netflix that I'm watching right now, and it's two. One is a journalist, the other is just a amateur geologist and a studier of sacred geometry. He's studying how things move in the heavens, so the geometry of the stars and how they move. And the ancient cultures have all these mythologies of things that are symbols of what happened in the ancient past, but it's just myth. And these archaeologists are discovering things that are physical that they actually find. The Stonehenge, for example, is a great example that we all know. They find these rocks in a formation, but they don't put the two together. It's just a mystery of what the Druids were doing. Whereas someone who studies the movement of the heavens, of the sun and the stars and the moon, they see that it's an actual cosmological device to map the stars' movement and to map the sun on the solstice. But if you didn't know what goes on with the stars and you're just looking at the rocks, they look like a mystery. Like, well, what are they there for? But if you understand the ancient thinking of, we don't have any cities with lights and everyone can see the stars like in the desert, it's a different perspective from the people that built it at that time. They could see things that we don't see now. And I think that's my point. Or in biology, there's a dung beetle and it moves across the desert in Egypt. But how is it navigating to go from point A to point B? They couldn't figure it out. And then they found out there's an actual detector inside of the beetle biologically that can detect the light coming from the stars, and it's mapping itself to the stars. And it seemed like an emergent property, but someone figured out biologically that they have an ability to map the stars, just like they did with birds. How do they go south? There's some sort of magnetic principle of the earth that we didn't know about 100 years ago, but the birds know about it because they have a detector that can detect these magnetic. It's, to me, it's just a question of sharing knowledge and discovering together so we get a better grasp of what's going on and not just dismissing. Like the show that I'm watching on Netflix is called The Ancient Apocalypse. And the guy's trying to tell all these archaeologists, a lot of these myths are actually based in fact and truth, but you have to decode the myth because it's written in a way that is narrative story, not actual fact. But if you take your computer and you line up our knowledge of the heavens, of where the stars were at that time, it doesn't make sense if you date it to the time that you dated it with carbon dating. You have to date it back a few thousand more years to when the stars were aligned at that point, and it tells the story a lot better. So they're telling a story with the stars that archaeologists don't want to say that story because they've already dated it at a certain time. They don't want to change what's in the books. So it's this big controversy of how old is human existence? And it keeps getting pushed back with new archaeological discoveries because they'll find a civilization at one point in time, but there's actually a civilization that was using that archaeological area 10,000 years before that. But everything we know, that there was no humans back then that had any knowledge of anything. So we have to just dismiss it. And it's this big controversy. It's really interesting.
There's a huge gap from myth to math. You start out with myths, which are basically stories that you tell children to quote unquote explain things, which are a little bit mysterious. And eventually the myth fades and gets replaced by the math, which is a mathematical model, a scientific model, which is a more technically precise explanation. But it's also, you can't give the math to a child because they can't process the language. So we have this transition from myths, narrative stories, to scientific models. And there's this huge gap from myth to math. Sam.
And I think it's not just children. There's still people who cannot process the math.
Exactly.
Still people who cannot process the reasoning, the evidence, the conclusions, the logic, the models.
Yeah.
And I think it's so sad.
It is.
You even posted that this week, that these people influence how we spend our money and how we govern ourselves. They're basing their choices and their votes on stories that they heard as children.
Yeah.
Without further thought.
Yeah.
They just accept as quote unquote true. And this is now, unfortunately, a larger and larger and larger proportion of the citizenry.
Yeah.
So good ideas inherently in a democracy will never win. Because the citizenry can survive without being educated.
Yep.
They accept truths without question. So their votes are easily manipulated and bought and distracted. And that is the downfall of democracy. How do we fix that?
as far as answer the question, how do you fix that? I think just look at humanity at all different times. And throughout all times, there were people that understood agriculture, understood geometry, understood really high mathematics, living right next to people that don't know how to cook their food. I think that having those two different groups of people together, living side by side, we're still in this moment in time. We have those two completely different cultures living 300, 400 miles away from each other.
When the Native Americans, when they planted their maize or whatever they were planting, they would throw in a dead fish along with the seeds. Now, did they understand, why that worked? Probably not, but they understood simply from experience that if you throw in a dead fish, you're going to get a nice plant, and if you don't, you get a scrawny plant. They probably had very little idea exactly what was the biology.
I'd beg to differ. I bet they had a much better understanding, just with a different vocabulary of the different types of bacteria and formation of nutrients and minerals, because it was passed down over so many generations.
It was a
And
practice.
spirits and gods.
And spirits and gods, and the spirit of lactobacillus. They didn't have a word for lactobacillus, but they knew the spirit of lactobacillus. And they knew which foods had lactobacillus, and they knew which foods not to eat, and they knew very advanced things without the vocabulary that we use now.
They
Right.
knew how to ferment beer way back in, biblical times. They could make beer. And I don't think it was until like Louis Pasteur and the microscope and all that stuff that they began to understand exactly what was the mechanism of fermentation, that they had these little tiny animalcules, he called them, these little yeast or whatever they were. They had no idea what the biology was. They just knew that if you threw these ingredients together and put it at the right temperature for a certain number of time, you'd get beer.
But does that make their knowledge any less because they don't have that? I mean, if they could
No.
make ceviche 3,000 years ago in Greece,
I would say
and
their
you're
knowledge
eating
is better than our average knowledge today. Because
They
at
had the
least
art.
they had a way of saying, is this working? Is this not working? And they could refine their knowledge. Today, how many of us actually do that? Very few of us do that today. The normal person today, I think, doesn't actually think that way. They just live life the way they know how to live. And they're not actually asking, what could I do better?
They learn the recipes.
Well,
it's like a recipe book. You follow the recipe, you get a cake. If you depart from the recipe, you don't get a cake. You get some mess. And they simply learn to follow the recipe that had been discovered and refined, by previous generations. They had no idea how to modify a recipe to create something that would work. It was all just experimentation.
Go ahead.
I'm just curious. The system of academia, as I understand it, and I didn't go through academia, so I don't know it as deeply as I could. But if you get to a point in your knowledge, then you're asked to add on to that knowledge. So you go from getting a master's degree to a philosophy doctorate to actually writing a dissertation and adding to that knowledge. In other words, you're supposed to write a new recipe in the academic cookbook. So how we're adding to that, I think that to me is where you get stuck. Is there's gatekeepers that allow you to publish that new cookbook and say, you know what, this is not adding to the knowledge. So I'm your advisor, and I'm going to denounce your ability to write that book. And how we're adding to the knowledge, the dynamic knowledge repository, as you say, Sam, how we add to that in the academic world often is gatekeep, just like the democratic process. If we're gerrymandering and putting people into certain groups and only allowing those areas to vote, it controls the outcome before you even have that's why I hate politics right now, is because there's too many behind the scenes metadata that's controlling the output before it even happens. So it's such a small margin of like 3%, and it's not real democracy. It's just they've decided already what 96% of the populace is going to vote, and they've engineered it that way. So now it's a question of, can we sway the 4% of the population? And that's what politics, I think, is right now. It's sort of, at least in America. I don't know what it is in other parts of the world. It's, you know, everyone's trying to get the voice of those 4% of those people and push them into a direction that they want them to go into, as opposed to asking them, what do you need? It's
Yeah,
a push versus pull.
those dynamics are very similar, but I think there's a very key difference. In science and academia, there are gatekeepers. Every PhD student, you know, has had those stories, I'm sure. And by the way, for the record, I was never a PhD student. I knew many, however. And the problem is that even if those gatekeepers can stymie a certain path of exploration, that doesn't stymie it permanently. There's always another possibility somewhere else, some other department, some other researcher, some other panel of advisors who can actually say, yes, this is interesting, okay? And those articles, those abstracts, or, you know, those proposals can be reviewed because they're shared, and they're shared openly. The problem with politics is a lot of the process is not transparent. And it's controlled by money behind the scenes. And once it's done, it's like very hard to undo. I think those are key differences. And whereas the outcome of science and academia, in theory, is truth or insight or knowledge, unfortunately, the outcome of politics is money flow. And once money flows a certain direction, it's got an inertia. That inertia is hard to stem. That's why every mistake we make in politics makes the problem worse.
Politicians.
Well,
want the
academia
money
has a
so
money
that
flow too. Yeah.
They want the money because they have to hire people like the three of us to do the things they don't know how to do. They have to hire the systems engineers, the scientists, the technicians, the geeks to do things which the politicians have no ability to do on their own. And so what they want is they want the money so they could buy us, people like us. And what we do is magic to them. They have no idea, how we're doing what we're doing.
And they have,
I mean, how did somebody make this little gizmo that, has all those features and functions that the politician hasn't a clue how they work? They know they exist. They know that people like us can create technology.
well, you got me thinking, Barry, the value of that magic, if you will, that knowledge, to give that to a larger group of people, that value just keeps going up. So in a university system, you can keep charging more money if those magicians can keep teaching other magicians how to create these things. Then there's a large money flow in academia.
I would love,
What's the value?
I would love to transfer all of my technical know-how to the next generation so I can retire. So I don't have to be the operator who has to run the systems that, our generation created. And it's harder than hell to transfer knowledge, the operational know-how to the next generation. I despair of ever being able to do that, to find candidates who have the aptitude and are willing to put in the effort to master all that knowledge so that they can take over when people like me are not around anymore.
Well, do universities and academic institutions ask you to come and teach at their universities?
They did. I mean, Boston University asked me if I wanted to come to the Metropolitan College, which is the old education college. And I turned them down because I would have to drive over to the campus, which in Boston, if I could have done it online, I would have. But back in those days, you had to commit to driving across town, and it wasn't worth it.
Yeah.
I went to the Science Museum because I could give away knowledge as a volunteer until they said I couldn't do it anymore.
Yeah. I think we moved into a epoch, time period where knowledge is starting to become free because of the internet. And I think that's changing everything.
The opportunity to learn is becoming free, but the decision to make the investment of the time and the practice to learn, that's, you can't, I can't give somebody the motivation. If they have the motivation, I can engage them as a mentor or as a source, but I can't do anything if they don't have the motivation. Sam?
I'm going to dig up an old blog. I think I wrote it over 10 years ago. But the point was the one that Josh just made, but slightly presented differently. And that is when the cost of producing a piece of knowledge, either an article or a book or a newspaper or a magazine or whatever, when the cost was relatively high, you had a few people who would control who could do this because they wanted it to be relatively high quality. It had to be vetted, it had to be reviewed, it had to be copyrighted, it had to be, just all kinds of decisions had to get made before these things could be released to the public, whether it was sold or broadcast or whatever, right? So as the cost came down, those gates are less necessary. So that as the cost is free now to publish on the internet, there are no quality gates.
Yeah.
And we know this, right? Anybody can spew idiocy and get on the internet. And the idiocy gets popular not because of its truth value or its impact value, but because of its engagement value. And this is the very mistake that social media magnifies.
Yep.
Because they want to monetize it. They don't support what's true. They support what's engaging, what gets them advertising dollars. And this is why I fucking hate advertising for decades, okay?
Yeah.
It's a useless time sink on society and people. But at the internet level, when the cost of production is zero, then the cost of producing idiocy is zero.
Yep.
And the cost of identifying the good pieces, the well-reviewed, the well-researched, the well-reasoned, the well-presented, that cost is higher. So now to actually see the wheat among the chaff, to get the signal among the noise, that's now, unfortunately, a very expensive process. Whereas before, it used to be easy. Before, you used to say, there's only 3 TV channels. If 60 Minutes is on, I can pretty much assume they did a good job researching that, and I'm going to pay attention to it.
Yep.
It's been reversed now. The cost of production used to be high, the cost of consumption used to be low, and the quality was high. Now the cost of production is low, the cost of finding the good is high, and now we get a bunch of crap.
Yep.
And that is society in a nutshell, and that is why we're such an idiot of a civilization.
And that's a recipe for collapse.
Stop rant, sorry.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, I think I liked your rant very much, Sam, and I think that's what Elon Musk is going to try to do. I'm not saying he's going to succeed, but he's going to try to revamp the system of the largest, most used social network in the truth-telling world, which is Twitter right now. That's where the journalists go. That's where people start their investigative journalism from. Unfortunately, that seems to have risen like the cream to the top of the social media of the point of starting a journalistic endeavor is Twitter. And I think that's why he decided to start charging money to try to get the truth up to the first page. And will he succeed in that? I don't know, but at least he's trying. And I give him credit for at least wanting to try to solve that, but it's a hard try. I mean, we know from having these conversations for 5 years, he's probably, I've got an idea. I'll just keep iterating. I think he's going to iterate himself out of a business or iterate into the greatest software that ever was created. It's going to be one of the two.
Do you see the hubris there? Do you see the hubris? He went into Twitter, which has a lot of experience looking at, how you validate someone, whatever, and just said, these guys are useless because there's too many bots. So he just tossed them out just on a whim. And now he's going to have to go, and either he or his new team is going to have to learn all those lessons all over again. So the hubris is basically assuming these people had no idea what they were doing. They had zero useful insight over the 10 or 20 years that Twitter has been in existence. Okay, just flat out just gets rid of these teams. But that, I think, is a dangerous hubris. To be so bleeping successful monetarily and financially, to think that you're that smart.
But he's doing what you just said. He fucking hates advertising. He started Tesla and did zero advertising. So he's going to try and do it without the advertising model. So good luck.
Yeah, I'm not
We'll
saying
see
that's
how
the
he
mistake.
does.
I'm not saying that's a mistake. The mistake is saying all these, many Twitter employees were delivering zero value. I think I read one thing that said he took a look at all the code check-ins, and the people that had the least lines of code checked in, those are the people got rid of first. So he
Yeah,
gets
I'm
rid
not
of the
saying the
people that
way
are
he
doing research.
manages is
You're getting rid of people who are architecting, or you're getting rid of people that are actually doing quality, and he's just assuming that lines of code is the only useful metric for quality.
I agree. But I'm not the owner of a $44 billion software company and a social media platform. And I think one of the things when I look at his mentality is the cost of acquisition per customer. He just looks as the cat cost. He's just looking at how many people are on the platform and how he can monetize that platform. He's old school from the 90s, like the way we used to do, software. He's going to learn. It's going to be interesting, but I applaud his endeavor. I think if Twitter was all verified and everybody actually was who they say they are, and there was also the ability for people to spew crap all over it, as long as it's way down at the bottom of the network, not at the top of the network, I'd like to use Twitter if it gets revamped that way.
So one story I came across, and again, I only know this by just having seen it very briefly, is that even though he was verifying with his new algorithm, this $8 blue check, somebody took the identity of some large pharmaceutical, I forget exactly when, and got a blue check mark, and then announced that insulin was going to be now cheap or free, right? This was actually
Wow.
this past week. You know what this does to people? They've got a blue check mark. Twitter says they're valid. Now these people say, oh, cool, nice, insulin is now free. What's the damage that has to cause when it now has to get reversed? That's why I've even seen they've even suspended now this $8 blue checkmark business. He thinks he can be smarter than everybody else that came before him. And yet, look at the mistakes that are being made. I'm not saying mistakes are unnatural. I'm saying there's hubris here in just assuming you're the only smart person. That's hubris.
There's definitely that, but how are they actually verifying that pharmaceutical company was the one that
clearly not well enough? Clearly not well enough.
But that's what I mean by he's going to make a lot of mistakes in his iteration, because he has to change whatever. I just remember when I started a software company, we would usually hire the people that were scamming us, the people that were beating our system. We would try to get them into the company because they were the ones that knew where our holes were. And I think that's part of software development, is you've got to find out who it was that did that, insulin thing, and get them on board. And, it's hard. It's a hard thing to create systems without the ability to be scammed.
I mean, when I have to buy an SSL certificate, I have to go through way more verification than it looks like Twitter did to actually verify this pharmaceutical company. Way more.
Yep. Yeah, well, I think eventually it's going to have to be done, whether it's Twitter or another company. Someone has to make an internet that is a verified internet, and then you have your 4chans and your other parts of the world that people can go for entertainment. But there needs to be some sort of verification process for the network that's still being created. It's not done being created. There's billions of people that need to come on. So it's a new thing. It's an emergent thing, Sam. It's emerging.
Emergent corruption, emergent scamming.
Corruption has
Emergent
emerged a
noise.
long time ago.
Emergent noise. Emergent misinformation, disinformation, disinfotainment.
I guess the thing that is emergent is corruption will always find a new way to subvert any new technology before the new technology finds ways to maintain the standard.
Yep. And then they have to keep putting on security until the technology becomes so burdened and dysfunctional that it's secure because it doesn't work at all.
Yep. I think, yeah, and you got to pick a point in time where you just, this is as best we can do it. Like the credit card companies, when I was first starting companies, I found out how much money was allotted for the scams of credit cards. And that's what raises the interest rates on the poor people. And that's what made me sickened of the capitalistic system, is all the people that steal, rob, and, you know, take from others, that penalty goes to poor people. I almost wanted to throw up in my mouth when I figured that out. I just couldn't believe I've got to pay 22% interest because someone is stealing and robbing billions of dollars, and they just let that go because that's part of doing business.
And
Instead
it
of
makes money.
closing
That's
that.
why they let it happen.
Yep.
Because the credit card company doesn't have to take the risk so long as the interest rate is high enough. It's everybody else that takes the risk and the cost.
They're pushing risk onto others.
Some of the biggest
And
are powerful politicians.
Same thing with insurance companies. You know, insurance companies will insure you until they know that you have a risk, and then they'll cancel their policy because now they're likely to have to pay you. Okay, and that policy shouldn't even be legal, in my opinion.
There's no way to legislate ethics. Cannot legislate ethics any more than you can legislate that people have to use calculus correctly.
Who actually ended up taking an ethics class anywhere in their education?
Twice.
Where was it?
First, I did it when I was in high school. The rabbi taught a course in ethics after school one day a week. And then at Stanford, I signed up for an ethics class. I can't remember if I audited it or enrolled in it for credit.
Was it the VTS class, Values, Technology, and Society?
No, it was in the philosophy department. And it was a lot of it was about social choice theory, but it was basically a class. So once at the graduate level and once as a extracurricular high school level.
Josh, what was yours?
So
I think it was business and ethics is what they called it. It was in my senior year of high school in Santa Barbara.
Kayla, I was wondering, is there an ethics class somewhere in your education? I took a philosophy class as a junior in high school where that was discussed.
Yeah.
And at that high school, that was a standard course that everyone had to take, but usually in their senior year.
Ethical
I
reasons.
don't know that philosophy is actually a required class in most high schools. I suspect not.
No, it wasn't available in my high school. But ethical reasoning is harder than calculus, maybe an order of magnitude harder than calculus.
And calculus derivatives are predictable.
Well,
Integrals are predictable.
well, yeah, except they're not easy to compute. They're not easy to figure out how to.
Yeah, but at least you know you can do it.
Well,
Somebody can do it.
you know that some mathematician can do it,
Yes.
but chances are the students can't. We learned a lot of theorems where the teacher outlined the proof, but none of us could generate the proof. And the teacher had to copy the proof. He couldn't, the prof couldn't construct the proof, you know, from first principles. So then you had to trust that the mathematician's proof was correct because you couldn't independently
Okay.
verify it.
So here's also my question. I didn't take the ethics classes that you took. Either of you, any of you, right? How many of them start from the standard economic starting point. I'm a human being. I'm going to do what's best in my own self-interest. How many classes start that way?
That's the Ayn Rand class.
No, that's economics 101. That's a James Nash assumption 101.
Yeah, utility functions and stuff like that. I mean, the simplest models of utility are probably not ethical, but they're simple.
They don't have to be non-ethical. They are unethical so long as they only have the self at the center.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point, is that the simplest models are self-centered.
Those are the simplest models, yes.
Right.
Because
I
it
think-
takes more compute cycles. It takes more memory. It takes more state to understand that there's more people than just you.
If I'm oblivious and I'm harming you in a sense where I don't realize I'm harming you, at some point there's going to be blowback. But I'm not anticipating the blowback. So my calculus is very self-centered and very local, and I'm not predicting, the long-term reverberations. Those long-term reverberations is what causes societies to collapse.
And even if there is blowback, oh, God didn't like me, right?
God ordained me to rule the world. What the hell, He pulled the rug out from under me. Yeah.
On a battlefield, typically, don't both armies have their own God or
Oh,
God?
yeah, sure. We justify that what we're doing is right, and the other side justifies what they're doing is right, and both sides are wrong. Both sides are in a
And
state.
after defeat, is their belief in their God less ever?
Yeah, there's a Harold Bloom, who was a towering intellectual at, I think Yale. I think it was at Yale. Wrote a book in which he considered, what happened to the Jews in the wake of the Holocaust. And there's a quote, I think the quote's in his book. At Sinai, we received the Torah, and at Auschwitz, we gave it back. The basic idea is that the Holocaust was a denial of the divine teachings that the Jewish people had. And it was really kind of a sad observation, but it's one of Harold Bloom's books.
It wasn't long ago.
Yeah, I saw him interviewed on Charlie Rose, and he was pretty old when he was interviewed on Charlie Rose, and you could just tell he was dispirited and disillusioned because he had seen how things had failed at a very subtle but substantive level, and you could just tell that he'd basically given up hope. He could write about it, he could do the intellectual analysis and write books about it, but there wasn't any solution. There was no process of recreation to fix it.
On a related note, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, I found a quote from somebody. It was a meme, and I can't recite it verbatim, but it was a a scrawl in one of the Holocaust concentration camps. And I think it read something like, if there is a God, he's got a lot of explaining to do.
Exactly. I mean, that was the whole point. Things like the Holocaust, and the Holocaust, by the way, is well documented, but there was lots and lots of repetitions of genocide. The genocide of the Holocaust was one of many, many genocides of the 20th century. It's just that what the Jews did is they documented the hell out of it, which the other genocides were not so well documented.
So to me, a lot of it here in the US traces back to this quote unquote Citizens United. So long as you give dollars influence,
Yeah.
we're completely lost.
Yep. This whole system is rotten. 1985, I was chatting with a detective in the local police force in New Jersey, and he, in a candid moment, says, Barry, he says, the whole system is rotten. This is a detective in the local police force in a small town in New Jersey. The whole system is rotten. He was, speaking from the inside. And, then you begin to see, yes, it's true. The whole system is rotten. And the likelihood of it being fixed is nil to non-existent, which is why systems collapse.
I also have to say, the infestation of police departments by white racists.
KKK.
I never thought that it could have been so bad.
It was.
I guess I was naive.
Look in the South, the KKK was running the police. They were running the sheriff's department, the police departments. They were in power. The KKK was in power.
So these are not isolated incidents.
Yeah,
These are
structural
systemic.
racism. Structural racism is built into the system. The intellectuals write about it. It's not a secret, but it's not getting fixed either.
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked. I guess I shouldn't have been, when even investigations into racism in Minnesota had entire police departments resign in protest.
Yep.
It was that systemic.
Yep. It's systemic dysfunction, systemic racism, structural racism, whatever you want to call it. It's hardwired into the DNA, the cultural DNA. It's hardwired, and it's not easy to change the DNA of a cultural model. Basically, if the DNA is rotten, the culture is going to collapse eventually.
Which is why this defunded the police business got so much controversy.
It's sad.
So how do we think about this systemically?
Well, I mean, you diagnose it. I mean, one of the functions of systems thinking is diagnostic reasoning. You look at the architecture of the system, the DNA of the system, the dynamics of the system, and you look at the empirical evidence and the predict the dynamics. And you see this is going to collapse. It's unsustainable. It's going to collapse, and then you publish your papers in the peer-reviewed journals, and nothing happens. And eventually, you retire and you die, and nothing happened. You did your analysis, you did your diagnostic reasoning, you published your peer review, and nothing happened.
Okay, so that fatalistic view, I would say, is self-limiting. And if we're truly imaginative, we could come up with other courses of action.
Oh yeah, we create synthetic worlds, virtual communities, little conclaves of colonies which try a different model, but they're not scalable. You have a few dozen people in a little conclave that uses a different sociocultural model, the kibbutzim or whatever you want to call them, and a few hundred people live in a kind of isolated culture, but then eventually you got to go back to the public agora, and what are you going to do?
So I think there's an education need. I don't know how to go about achieving it, but one education need is to show how when money controls elections, it can be damaging in either direction, both directions in a two-party system.
Yeah.
That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two is we have to say there's a wide variety of social issues. And when the first responders are always police and they're not trained on other, soft skills,
they're not social,
and they're only trained in police tactics,
right?
Then that's what they're going to apply.
Right.
And that's why defunding police and actually getting more resources to social initiatives Kayla, this is where you play, is so important. And the places, the municipalities that have done this have seen good results. It's got to be obvious. So defunding doesn't mean get rid of them all, although there's an argument to be made for that. It just means we have to take some of those resources, those billions of dollars spent in police departments, and spread them to social programs. And not treat everything as a possible violent crime. And understand, some of the illnesses behind them.
Most of the violence in the culture is state-sponsored violence under the color of law.
Yeah.
The state-sponsored violence under the color of law is the dominant amount of violence in the culture. Far and away.
I'm going to take some notes here.
People invented religions to try to overthrow this notion of state-sponsored violence under the color of law, and they did create the religions, but then the adherents to the religion basically lost the story, lost the message, and reverted back to enacting the system that they were trying to supplant. They ended up enacting the dysfunctional system, the violent system. So empirically, you look at the history, you got 6,000 years of recorded history, and you see we're not making any progress to speak of. You went from theocracy to monarchy to democracy and some in between combinations, and it's still corrupt, it's still dysfunctional, it's still violent, it's still wasteful.
You know what? In all of these ocracies, why is there no word for rule by the smart?
It's called technocracy. I wrote about
No. Technocracy is not necessarily smart.
Well,
I mean, you can say there's a correlation, but I don't think it actually says that.
Yeah, I don't really know if there is a word. Technocracy is the closest word I could come up with. That is management of people who know what the hell they're doing. The people who put up the James Webb Space Telescope, that was a technocracy.
Oh.
They knew what they were doing and they did it.
Meritocracy might be another close term, but it doesn't say exactly what I wanted to say.
Not really. I don't know. I mean,
Illuminocracy.
The thing is that there are very few smart people, and we don't like to put single individuals into power, even if they're. Look at Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel has a PhD in chemistry or something. She was a very smart person. They managed to put her into power. She did a pretty damn good job compared to other world leaders of big countries. And then in the United Kingdom, they put Boris Johnson into power. In the US, they put Trump into power. So yeah, occasionally they'll put somebody very smart in power, and they'll rule for a term or two, and they're gone.
See, if smart people get into politics, it seems like the pattern is there's still a bunch of dumb people in politics. So they have a hard time getting smart programs approved and implemented, right? So at the next election, people can always say, this person was ineffective. And they go back to voting the opposite way, which is to vote in a pretty. Anyway, I won't say it.
I mean, Socrates was a pretty smart guy, and they voted him off the island. So if somebody like Socrates can be voted off the island, and then when they had a change of government and Aristotle retired back to Macedonia, within a year or two, he died of a broken heart. He went back to Macedonia and basically wept himself to death in a couple of years. called what happened in Greece a crime against philosophy. That was his words. It was a crime against philosophy. Spend your whole career trying to develop a philosophy of Plato's ethics and all that kind of stuff, and the people who are voting basically declare it to be a criminal enterprise. The U.S. government declared Bell Labs to be a criminal enterprise. That's very dispiriting. When you think you're doing something, it's really good and valuable and constructive and takes a lot of really smart people, and the government says, nope, it's an American criminal enterprise. You got too many smart people running one system. Can't have that. Can't have the smartest people all working for one company and being the dominant player in some sector. It's un-American. You got to give the dummies equal chance to purvey the goods and services.
Yeah. Would we say that about the weapon systems we build?
Oh yeah, non-functioning weapon systems. And they hire very smart people. I know some very smart people with MIT degrees who worked in the defense industry, and they earned a lot of money.
Remember a Desert Storm or Desert Skirmish or whatever it turned out to be?
Yeah.
They were supposed to be these surface to air anti-missile defense systems.
They didn't work.
They're even embarrassed to publish the success rates of those systems.
Raytheon, which is located right here, not far from where I live, Raytheon built those.
I know.
It didn't work.
I know.
The very smart people worked at Raytheon. When I was graduating from college, I interviewed at Raytheon. Raytheon, Honeywell, and Bell Laboratories were the only three companies I interviewed with. And I was really shocked at how poor Raytheon was as a potential employer. I was really turned off by them because they were a defense contractor. And MITRE was a defense contractor. I was really disappointed with them too. I went to Bell Labs and they were great for about 15 years. And then the government says, no, we're going to break you up. You're no good. Went to the Science Museum as a volunteer and they said, no, we can't have volunteers who know what they're doing. You got to be just a robot. It's very discouraging. It's a recurring story.
What also is sad. So many of our laws are to protect stupid people from themselves.
Yep.
Don't do this dangerous thing. Don't wear a motorcycle helmet, when you ride a motorcycle. People are fighting about that.
Yeah, don't get a vaccine.
And I know Alex mentioned that. That's an interesting situation right there.
So yeah, you live long enough and you see all these patterns, these discouraging patterns that our species just doesn't seem capable of evolving out of these dysfunctional models.
But Barry, the reason I'm trying to discuss this with you and Josh and Kayla is as systems thinkers, as wannabe optimists, how can we think differently? Because coming up with what had happened before, that's okay. That's acknowledging the past. But using that to say, oh, it will never work, that to me is not systemic thinking.
Well, you have these little pockets of reducing entropy, these little pockets of proving a system works, but it doesn't scale up. It basically runs for 5 or 10 years and then it poofs. and it doesn't seem to take over and become the dominant. It's
Okay,
little-
so here's the question. Does it really need to scale? This is a fundamental question I have to ask myself. I used to think that collaboration needs to scale. Does it really?
Well, I mean, they couldn't have done the James Webb Space Telescope if they didn't collaborate with the European Space Agency and NASA and whoever else.
Agreed. Okay, so that's a few 10,000s of people, right? But that's not everybody.
No, it's a very tiny elite group who worked for like 20 years, and they collaborated fabulously. And that's what really smart people worldwide can do.
Yeah.
And so it's a demonstration, but can you see that kind of collaboration scaling up to the culture at large, politics at large?
I'm trying to figure out, does it need to? Like, for example, I'm surprised at the number of people working on fusion reactors that are saying, hey, we're this close.
Yeah.
Hey, we're this close.
Been saying that for 50 years.
But they haven't needed everybody in the world, and they're still making progress. So I'm thinking the pinnacles of accomplishment in domains of interest that could further human survival or whatever, they can be done by a few. In fact, that's always the way it's done, right? So I'm thinking, as a correction to my own thought, does collaboration really need to scale? I think clearly it needs to scale to some effect, but it doesn't need to scale necessarily to global.
It depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to put up one satellite, if you're going to design and put up one instrument, then that's what 10,000 people, however many it was. If you're going to run a government, if you're going to run a country, that does have to scale. I mean, look at the people who write operating systems. We've got three big operating systems. You got Windows, you got Linux, and you got Mac OS. And what would you say? Probably a few tens of thousands of people work on those operating systems.
At most.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe Joshua knows. And then you buy them. And I mean, I'm sitting here looking at my operating system. I go, this is a really complicated system, and I don't really know how it works. I have a crude idea, but I can't tinker it. If I try to tinker it, I end up breaking it.
That's true of two of them. You can actually tinker with Linux.
Yeah, you can. I mean, in the last couple of days, I was playing with one of my older machines that I had really turned off for a long time. It had topped out at El Capitan. That was the last natively supported operating system, which was fine because it was a perfectly good operating system, except that now it does no longer get support, and Chrome says you can't run it on these old operating systems. I said, okay, you can hack these systems to install newer operating systems that weren't intended to be natively supported. And I've done that. I've been playing around with putting new operating systems that were not natively supported on a lot of my older machines. But it's really arcane. I mean, it's like doing auto mechanics on your car. It's really, and it works. But you spend days, trying to figure out how to fool the operating system to install on a machine that it claims it doesn't run on. And it half works. Parts of it work, other parts of it, aren't there. And it's a hobby that you do for solving a puzzle, but the hell, I don't know.
I remember we talked about some of that yesterday.
Yeah.
So I'm still trying to figure out how we as systems thinkers should be trying to identify opportunities for affecting change.
Well, what I've found is that if it's a do-it-yourself project, as one person does everything, then there's a good chance that you'll do something. If it requires a team, the bigger the team, the less likely it will succeed.
Unless somebody has a lot of money.
Isn't that the Peter principle? if you add more people to a project, you slow down the thing. And basically there's one.
That's not the Peter principle. The Peter principle is the one where you actually rise to your level of incompetence.
Oh, what's the name?
The average to the mean of competence of large people is that's the Fred Brooks, mythical man month principle.
Mythical man month. What's the name of the mythical man month principle? I don't know. It's
the
one of those. I forget.
pregnancy in 1 month that's the other way to put it.
Yeah. So yeah, the more people you put on it, the less likely that you'll make progress. And basically, one person figures it out, carries the ball into the end zone, and everybody else is just running around the field doing nothing.
Because the cost of communication is so high in large teams.
Right. Exactly. You end up losing efficiency as you add more people.
And the cost of communication goes even higher if you have stupid people on your team.
Yep. And I ran into that at Bell Labs. I would solve a problem after spending 6 or 9 months on a problem. And then when I go to present the solution, I've got all these people who have no idea, what the solution is or how to understand it. And they drag their feet trying to decide if they want to prove it or not, because they don't understand the work. That was the part of the activity that I didn't have a model for, convincing, how many people up the management line to, to sign off on the solution. Yep. And there's no shortage of stupid people. I see this, in every walk of life. I see the stupid people are in power and they disapprove or fail to make the decisions that they are empowered to make, and you get stalled out. The system gets, the solution exists on paper, gets stalled out. So what do? You work on systems where you don't need people in power to approve it, things that you can do on your own and just put out there. This is what artists do. Artists will sit there all by themselves in their studio and they'll make a painting or a piece of music or, piece of art, and they'll just put it out there and nobody has to approve it. If you were an artist and you had to get approval for your art, forget it. It ain't going to happen. But then that means that what you can do is limited to what one person can do. I mean, even musical bands, you get a band of, 4 or 5 band members and you have a year or 2 of success, and then you start to get conflicts within the band and it falters and it breaks up, and Paul McCartney goes off and starts his own independent, musical thing, and and then a bunch of them die, and you had a few years of collaborative productivity, and then it faded. One person wrote the Harry Potter series. One person wrote the Game of Thrones series. One person wrote the whole thing.
You have to excuse me. I had to take stuff out of the car from our trip to San Diego. So we got in late last night. But I really like that question. Does it have to scale? And I think I'd like to hear another question is, what types of scales do what? What does a really amazing 108 person company look like? What does a really amazing 8 person company look like? What can they accomplish? And when do they just hit a wall where they have to have more people because they can't move forward? Or when can they engineer their way out of it with just 8 people?
Yeah.
It's a really good question. That's kind of what I was talking to Doug about. The last conversation we had is he was talking about building these big scalable networks. And I said, just try to get 150. or just try with 75. Like, and once you get 75 and you get all the systems done, you've gone through all the values, you've gone through all the checks, and you have all the conversations, then come back to me when you have 75 and let's try to scale it, either double it, or I love the idea of the Fibonacci spiral. Is just go 1.618. Try to just go almost 60% more, not 100% more, because I feel like doubling often causes problems. But just if you have 75 people and you go to 100, it usually stays about the same if the little changes. But if you go to 150 people, you'll start to notice there's these really interesting moments where things start to break and systems don't work.
Yeah, it's a problem that I never figured out how to solve. I observed the problem, and I did my best to address it, and I failed. It's reality. I'm not alone in that regard. A lot of people have really great ideas, and they just can't get the airplane off the ground. Get a test flight, one test flight works, two test flights work. After that, there's no enthusiasm. There's no learning curve for the culture at large.
Hard to maintain quality when you scale.
Yeah, that's reality.
It's hard to know when to stop and look at the quality instead of just saying, you know what, this is good enough for now. We don't really need to deal with that till later. I mean, my experience has always been with databases, if you get to a certain level, it's just working great. Just stay right there and don't grow. You've got all the iterations out, things are really moving. You can put in some more data as they need. Obviously you want to keep growing, but just do it slow. Like, slow is better. I think that's the problem with our society, is everyone thinks fast is better. But if every car drove 3 to 5 miles an hour, we'd have no accidents. We'd have no problems if we all just drove on the street at 3 to maybe we max out at 10 miles an hour. Be a lot less accidents.
Well, I mean, most species, four-legged species or two-legged species travel at less than 10 miles an hour. And we walk at 3 miles an hour. That's how our species operated for, I don't know, millions of years.
We'd also get more thoughts too, because we would see things at a speed that our brain can take in.
Yep.
When we were going by a building or a tree or a lake, we'd see more at that speed, and we'd probably be a better species for it. But that's, argue that with someone that wants to get to their parents' house or get to their job, it's a crazy society that we're living in. I mean, we've been speeding up for centuries. Like,
It's more than a crazy
going really
society, it's a
fast.
crazy making society.
Say that again, Barry.
It's not just a
Crazy
crazy
making?
society, it's a crazy making society. Working with other people is crazy making. I have to work with people at the community center, and some of those people I work with are crazy making. Well, at least one of them is. Maybe only one of them is crazy making. But there are crazy making people in every organization. And you somehow got to work around them.
I like to look at it as I studied Buddhism, and I really took it into heart that, the Buddha said we're all one. So, like, what does that mean? Like, I'm Barry, like Barry's Barry. I'm Josh. Like, I'm not Barry. Barry's Barry. But what does it mean to help each other on our path of this? I don't even know what do we call life? Like, it's such an ambiguous thing of, like, why are we even here? What are we doing on this planet? Like, why did we come here? Why do we have consciousness? What are we doing? I think if you don't solve that, all the other systems problems just become crazy.
Well,
If you don't know why you're here.
People have been pondering existential questions since the dawn of consciousness, and that's one of the reasons that religions got invented. Religions got invented to try to answer those questions. And the answers were sometimes satisfying, at least for a period of time. And then the answers sort of fell by the wayside and weren't satisfying anymore.
But I'm sure you found your own answers through your life, Barry. Like what provides purpose and meaning.
Basically, when I was a teenager, I thought, what am I doing here? And I thought the only answer that makes sense is see if I can leave this planet in better shape than I found it. And in some very narrow disciplines, I could do that. I could make things better in some narrow disciplines. But as you zoom out, you go, well, I can make it better here. That's about it. I can make it better for a few people in a narrow domain, and that's it. But on balance, I don't think that the world got to be better in my lifetime. It got to be better maybe in terms of some technology systems. We got refrigerators and airplanes and cars and radios and televisions and computers and internets, and some stuff got better, but politics, I don't know that politics got any better. I don't necessarily think it did.
What do you think of I think he's a statistician type guy, Bjorn something. He does those TED Talks where he shows all the stats of are things getting better or worse. And he seems to think everything's getting better and better and better. Just his framing.
Steven Pinker claims things are getting better.
Yeah, Steven Pinkerton's another one.
Yeah. I mean, you can sort of find a spectrum where on this side of the spectrum, things are measurably getting better. On that side, they're either not, they're in stasis or they're degrading. I mean, are things better after the Second World War, things did get better in Europe. But now, with what's going on in Ukraine, clearly things are, at least for the time being, gotten worse. And in terms of energy and other issues, environment, things are getting worse. So there are domains where things are getting worse.
Do you think it's just the perspective? Meaning you can argue both sides at any time.
You can find examples of both. You can find areas where things are getting better. You can find areas where things are getting worse.
I like that Bhutan happiness index. Are the people getting happier? Are they having an enjoyable time of it? Are they more miserable?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. I mean, it's not like everything's getting better or nothing's getting. Some things are getting better and some things are not. My health is not getting any better. I'm aging.
What if we reverse your aging and you grow younger?
Well, there was a picture. Dorian Gray was a book about that, right? So, but that's a flight of fancy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm resigned to the fact that I'm going to grow old and die within the next 15 or 20 years. That's just pretty much a given. I mean, there are people who would like to, live forever and think that they can figure out how to make that happen. I don't expect they'll succeed.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell that I'm declining. I can tell that I'm experiencing cognitive decline, in the last 10, 15, 20 years compared to my peak.
Are you going to try any psychedelic substances, Barry? Have you tried they're legalizing psilocybin and DMT, I think, in different states right now in America.
I don't have any plans. I've never taken drugs other than sugar, chocolate, and aspirin. That's about it.
That's the only? No alcohol?
Well, yeah, alcohol. You want to call that a drug? I guess you can call alcohol a drug.
That's a drug for sure.
I mean, I'll drink beer and wine. I hardly ever drink hard liquor. I'll take a sip of a hard liquor drink, but not much more than an ounce. But,
Just a sip?
I mean, I put I put Ovaltine in my coffee, which is, it's not really a drug, I guess. It's just nutrients.
Is there any caffeine in Ovaltine? I don't think so, right?
No,
There's no.
the coffee has caffeine in it. So yeah, I guess you have to count, I guess if you count caffeine, sugar, aspirin, chocolate, alcohol, that's pretty much it.
I was talking about psychedelic experiences where your entire state of mind is altered and reality as you know it is not that way while the drug is taking hold.
No, I never took any psychedelic drugs, never smoked weed. Never smoked tobacco either.
Yeah. And it's pretty amazing the state of consciousness, just biologically what our brains are doing just to take in the information to just be here on this planet. I mean, that's an amazing process.
I mean, we're inundated with more information than we can process, and you end up tuning out a lot of it because you'd be overwhelmed if you try to process it all.
Yeah, I've taken psilocybin and talked to a tree for 4 hours. I don't know why I felt the tree was communicating, but it had things to say, and maybe I was making it all up, but it was a great I enjoyed it. I had a great conversation with the tree.
If I'm in a state of distress, I will talk to my computer by writing. It'll all come out through my fingertips on the keyboard, and I will end up writing a rant or whatever you want to call it, the blog.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote a book-length manuscript back in the 1980s just to get rid of stress from bad stuff in life. So, and I think a lot of art is just basically transforming, whatever's pent up emotions into something, whether it's words, poetry, painting, music, whatever you want to, whatever the outlet is. Just lost Kayla. It's 1 o'clock.
Yeah, I think the state of consciousness is really important. I do what's called freestyle rap, where you have to kind of come up with a rhyme really quick. And it's like tricking your brain, your neurons, to not go down certain pathways. And it's also rhythmically, so you have to follow a cadence of different music that you're rapping to. But you're also storytelling. So you're doing narratives and storytelling. I used to teach people, don't just rap to have words come out of your mouth. Tell a story. Tell me what you did today. The people that do it, they find this dopamine hit. I don't know what it is, but they have to keep doing it. They keep calling me up like, let's do it again. That was so cathartic. It lit out so many things. It was like a mind dump for the defragmentation of the hard drive.
We'll do things to get a dopamine hit, a serotonin hit, an endorphin hit. I mean, whatever gives you pleasure, if it's eating chocolate or whatever, people will do something that gives them pleasure, whether it's an intellectual thing or a physical thing, going running or walking or playing a sport or whatever the hell it is, people do whatever gives them pleasure, and people will hack. People will do
but it really does hack your it hacks your physiology. Like when you get a runner's high, that really cleans out different parts of the body system so that you can function.
Yeah.
And it clears the brain. It clears out neurons. Like I'm not using the proper scientific words, but you know what I mean. Your patterns of thinking sometimes get stuck, like the Archimedes concept. Like he's can't figure out this problem and sits in the tub. I know that's just a story, but there's something to it. What is Sam writing?
Oh, it's an article. It's an article that I linked to, but I don't even remember. I don't recognize it by its title. Let's just see what it is. Studies.
The title is Studies Help Understand Why Some People Are So Sure They're Right. About critical reasoning versus dogma.
Yeah. I don't remember posting it. 2017. Well, if I posted it when it was fresh, that would be 5 years ago. So yeah. But yeah,
Actually, Barry, you posted this on July 28th.
Of this year, last summer?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, if you say so. I don't actually remember it now. But yeah. And
What if you what if you did a postulate? Oh, go ahead, Barry. Sorry.
I was gonna say, I've had this battle against misconceptions, and it's it's a very futile battle to dispel misconceptions. And a lot of scientists, try to debunk misconceptions, and you can do it. You can post a story, misconception, and the misconception doesn't go away. Still there.
I try to postulate that I'm probably always wrong if I could see the world through the understanding of another paradigm. And that's why I enjoy meeting people, because there's so many different paradigms to see the world through.
Yeah.
Like Kafka saying he woke up and he was a cockroach. What is that world of being a cockroach? And he's trying to type as a cockroach and wrote a whole book in that paradigm.
Yeah.
I think that affected me, of the idea that there could be some other reality that is the true one, and I'm living in the false one.
Well, I mean, if you go into dramatic arts and you play a character in a drama, you adopt a persona other than your native one. I mean, it was really interesting. Peter Sellers could adopt multiple personas in the same movie. He could play 3 or 4 different characters in the same movie. But when he wasn't playing a character, his own native personality was quite bland. He had a very bland personality when he wasn't in character.
Mm-hmm.
He had that fabulous ability to go into character, on a moment's notice, and then go back out of character to a perfectly bland personality.
Yeah, I saw the movie Sybil when I was, I think, 7 years old or 8 years old. That changed my understanding of what reality could be if you could have multiple personality disorder.
Yeah.
And you're constantly living in, post-traumatic stress of you can't handle your life and your personality. You have to go to another one.
They're fabulous entertainers, Robin Williams and forgetting his name now, Jonathan Winters. They could, they could enact a character for a sketch for 2 minutes and then drop back out of it again. They'd go on a Johnny Carson and they could do these little shtick where they would, put on this whole synthetic personality. It was very entertaining. And then they would drop back out of it, and they were, when they weren't doing character, they were just sitting there, pretty bland.
Yeah, I found a comedian that he practiced doing characters for each show, and they've done over 300 shows. So he's done about 180 characters.
Yeah.
And just watching him develop the characters and watching each show, and they bring back the same character, it's really fascinating.
Lily Tomlin, had all these different characters that she could portray.
Mm-hmm.
And so, these people can, have a fabulous career in the entertainment business by portraying characters that are very convincing, very realistic, very dynamic. And it's not them. That's not their native character. Native character is actually pretty bland.
Yep. And I think taking on the persona of that, like for me, for marketing, I try to understand the demographic, not just the numbers on a piece of paper, but actually going to the place where they live and having dinner with them and really understanding what their reality is. Like I went to Arizona and everyone was a Christian, but there were punk rock Christians, there was heavy metal Christians, there was rap Christians, there was like for Christian, they all went to Christian church and did, communion or whatever it is, the fellowship is what they call it. So they hold hands and pray to Jesus, and they all love Jesus, but they're really different people.
Yeah, going through the motions. There was an opera version of Buffy the Vampire Slayer where they put on a drama. It was a musical episode, an opera. And one of the songs was Going Through the Motions. They basically parodied their own characters in the drama, in the Buffy verses, doing their thing. And they were just mechanically going through the motions of the character, and then they would come out of the character and they're just there. Going Through the Motions was the name of one of their songs.
Yeah, I've been watching my daughter is like figuring out when she meets new people how to act in a way that communicates to the new person. And it's really interesting. She'll stop and freeze, think about what she's going to do. And she's, trying to win the hearts of the people she's with in order to feel safe and secure. And, she's a brand new person. It's really fascinating.
If you can entertain people, they'll let you live. If you bore people, they won't let you live. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I watch her actually try to decide how she's going to entertain grandma and grandpa, or we met a few different people in San Diego. She got to interact, and she was playing soccer with this Italian guy. It was pretty amazing. I didn't even know she had the ability to play soccer.
Yeah. So
I don't think she knew, but
life is strange. Life is strange.
yeah, I think it's awesome. I think the amount of different ways of interacting on this planet is almost infinite.
Yeah.
I mean, it's incredible.
Well, certainly,
especially when you cross cultures.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah, I mean, the creative arts has got an uncountable space of things that you can do that are novel, innovative. Yeah. I mean, people get tired of recurring patterns and they look for something innovative, but different. They'll do something that's different, but different doesn't necessarily mean more amusing, more innovative. It could just be more weird.
Or
gets
weird,
really fast.
some sort of tie-in where they understand the weirdness. Like that's what as an entertainer, I've noticed if I'm just weird for weird's sake, I lose the crowd. But if I'm weird and then I tie in something they know, and then I bring that thing that they know into the weirdness, then I pull them into the scene.
It's like self-parody. I mean, there's a certain point in an entertainer's career where they do a parody of themselves.
Yeah.
They'll do a send-up of their own persona, their own shtick.
Well, it's not taking yourself so seriously. You can make fun of yourself.
Right.
You know that you're a character, and then you're aware that you're a character, then you emphasize it even more.
Yeah.
People like that, especially in comedy.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen Colbert can do that. He does these self-parody send-ups of his own shtick.
Yeah, I'm worried about him. I was a big fan of Stephen Colbert all the way back to he was on a show. I'm trying to remember.
Colbert Report.
No, before the Colbert Report, before Jon Stewart, he was on a guy from Saturday Night Live, Dana Carvey. He was on a Dana Carvey show.
Oh.
And it was him, Dana Carvey, Steven, the other Steven that was on there was just I think they had 6 episodes, but he was trying to find his characters there. And then he mastered it on the Jon Stewart show. And then he was able to go off on his own with that Colbert character. But I think when he had to be himself, he sort of lost himself. I noticed after a couple of years, he didn't know who he was. Was he Stephen Colbert or was he Stephen Colbert?
Yeah.
Like I found, and then I think this is just my own take on his career. The COVID being at home just broke him. I just watched him turn into an alcoholic and just feel broken.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the COVID lockdown and all that stuff really was very disruptive of a lot of our cultural processes.
Did you see the episode where Jon Stewart came on the Colbert Show and said the Wuhan virus came from a place called the Wuhan Virus Institute?
Well, I know of that conspiracy theory to that effect, but I never saw him say that.
It's not a conspiracy theory; it's a fact. The name of the institute was the Wuhan Viral.
Oh, yeah, I know. I mean, they U.S. and all these countries have these institutes where they study viruses, Centers for Disease Control, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I read those stories.
Well, I'm just saying Jon Stewart was just stating a fact, and Stephen Colbert was like, "Whoa, don't say that's not in my talking points. That's not what we're supposed to talk about." And he was like, "Well, why can't we talk about this? I'm on your show." And it was a really interesting interaction where now Jon Stewart is on Stephen's show as opposed to Stephen on the Jon Stewart show.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the dynamics were interesting.
I mean, entertainment really has as bread and butter is controversy. You have characters arguing, competing perspectives or antagonistic perspectives, and that some people find that very entertaining. I tend not to find it entertaining because it's not very enlightening. I'm more interested in stuff that's enlightening, and a lot of comedy isn't intended to be enlightening. It's just to, something to laugh at.
Well, I think Jon Stewart walks that line very different than Stephen Colbert, where Colbert is trying to be entertaining and just funny.
Yeah,
He's
Jon
also
Jon Stewart has a very serious side to his.
very serious.
Yeah.
Have you watched his new show? Have you seen The Problem with Jon Stewart?
No.
He interviewed Dick Durbin, the senator from Illinois, about a new law that's trying to be passed to allow for the fast tracking of Afghanistan interpreters during the war to come over to America, because a lot of them got left behind when we left Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And it's a real controversial issue right now because they promised the people of Afghanistan that helped America that they would take care of them, and they didn't. And the Congress is trying to pass a law to fast track that, but the bureaucracy is keeping them from asylum in
We don't
America.
even take care of our veterans. I mean, the Vietnam veterans especially was a bad story, but wars, and they're basically left, twisting slowly in the wind.
Yeah, and that's what Jon Stewart's trying to champion, that taking care of our veterans and taking care. He gets he stops comedy when that, taking care of the 9/11 first responders was a big issue that he took on in New York. And it's someone needs to champion people that are getting left behind. I think that's an important part of society.
I think our whole species is getting left behind.
You think so?
Yeah, I do.
I know QCell is championing the nurses that had to work their ass off during COVID, and they're getting left behind, and she's championing making sure they don't get left behind.
I mean, do you remember there was a program called No Child Left Behind in public school education?
I was just getting into education when they instituted that program, and that's what got me out of education.
Yeah. But notwithstanding, I mean, these are marketing terms. It's like turnkey and plug and play. These are marketing terms, but they're fluff. They're terms. They're promises that are simply not realized in practice.
Well, like we've always said in politics, you say one thing and you do the other. So it was making sure that we could allow for the testing and kids to be passed from school district to school district and get left behind. But instead of calling it Every Child is Left Behind, they just flipped the name to No Child Left Behind. And then they masked what they were actually doing is leaving all the children behind in their education and lowering education.
A lot of names are like that. It's like I said, plug and play is a marketing term. Nothing is plug and play. Even when it's claimed to be plug and play, it ain't. Nothing is turnkey. They have these great marketing terms that sound, this is going to be, the bee's knees, and it ain't. It's just a marketing term.
So you haven't found Apple products to be plug and play?
No.
Like when you get your Apple computer, you plug it in and turn it on. Whereas when I got my PC, I had to load the DOS and load this. Not anymore, but I'm saying.
First of all, I've never bought a brand new computer from anybody. I've always taken cast off computers and brought them back to life from the graveyard, from the technology graveyard.
So you've never had a brand new Apple computer?
Correct.
Oh man, it is plug and play. You literally put in your Apple ID and boom, it all just works.
Yeah. I mean, back in the 1980s when I was at MITRE, they gave us a Mac 2, which I guess was new, but that was an office computer, so I didn't buy it. It was just there.
Yeah, I'm impressed with the Apple company.
I've sat down.
They made it so simple.
Yeah. But I spend a lot of time, resurrecting old gear, so that's not plug and play.
Yeah, I
repurpose.
knew it worked. I gave an iPhone to my niece when she was 8 months old, and she just knew how to use it. Like she never had to be trained. It's a pretty amazing operating system with the way that the touch, it's because it's touch based. If you touch it with one finger, it does one thing, two fingers, three fingers, and four fingers. And the little kids' fingers are really tiny, so they can really get in there. It's a lot easier for kids than it is for adults because of the size of their stylus.
One of the reasons I end up with so many old computers is that people do discard stuff when it starts to be obsolescent or problematic, and they'll just go out and buy the next generation, you know, after 3 or 4 years. I end up with all this gear that's, I can put a fresh operating system on it, Linux or whatever, and bring it up to a state beyond the level that it was at when it was brand new. You know, get an old laptop that had Windows 7 on it and put Windows 10 on it, for example.
And then it fixes the problems.
Well, it's based, well, because Windows 7 wasn't getting any updates. So
Okay,
you have operating systems obsolescent.
I don't know what version of Windows I stopped at. It was 2002, I think, 2003 is when I stopped. But
So I mean, I do get a kick out of resurrecting, bringing these essentially dead, not really dead machines, but these cast off machines back to life.
but you don't believe in plug and play? You don't think that exists? You think that's just a marketing term?
It's more of a marketing term than a reality. Mainly, I guess, because I want things to do things that are not just the basic functions. I want some of the more exotic functions, and they're not plug and play.
Gotcha. But if you just kept with the base system, it would be plug and play.
It could be, yeah, could be.
Yeah.
I think Apple's more plug and play. There's the basic operating system. If you buy a brand new computer and it's got the operating system already installed on it, so they installed it as part of the manufacturing. Yeah, you can turn it on, and then you got to go through a setup. Although that's typically not too difficult.
Yeah, I'm just impressed with over time. They just kept making it easier and easier, and they put the skip button in there, skip, 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 skip. So if you set up a new iPhone or a new Apple computer, you could pretty much just put in your ID, skip, 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 skip. And then of course you could do that stuff later, but it will work without all those things.
You get a plain vanilla system with minimum functionality, no bells and
Yeah.
whistles. But then if you want to set up cloud storage in your photos and syncing and all that kind of stuff, that's not plug and play. I guess.
Yeah, what you're saying kind of answers Sam's earlier question as far as scalability. Is if you want to scale it, you've got to keep going through setups.
Right.
Otherwise, if it's just going to stay, this will work for 100 people, you could make it the simplest.
And for a lot of
Yeah.
people, they don't want any of the bells and whistles. They just want to, get up, fire up a browser, and that's it. They're done.
Yeah, I never learned how my car works. I got the car a year and a half ago, and I still to this day have no idea what these little symbols are that pop up on the car, and I have no idea how the car actually works. Like I never took the tutorial. I just started driving it. And
This is why people buy new cars when the old one has a problem. They don't want to diagnose them and fix them. They just dispense with the old one and get a new one.
yeah,
I mean, I got a 25-year-old car. I nurse it along and do a lot of maintenance on it. And eventually it is going to die and not be worth, keeping it going. But
yeah. I wish kids came plug and play because I got to go take care of I hear her yelling.
All right.
Her operating system just got upgraded with this trip to San Diego.
All righty. Well, yeah, it's almost 1:30 here, so maybe we can call it a day.
All right, Barry.
All righty. Take care. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Okay, Sam, I don't know if you're listening or not, but I think I will stop the recording and end the meeting unless you want to pop on to say anything. I'll give you a few seconds in case you're listening. Oh, you want to take care of the ducks. So I am going to stop the recording and end the meeting then, Sam. So let's see. Oh, I don't think I can. It says I'm a co-host. Can I not stop the recording and end the meeting? Nope. All righty, I guess I don't have the authority to stop the recording and end the meeting, so I'm just going to leave the meeting and it'll keep running, and I cannot stop the recording. Take care, Sam. Talk to you later.